Hey everybody, welcome to Thought Leadership for Climate Emergency with the Climate Mobilization. We're so glad you all are here with us. My name is Marina Males and I'm the community manager here at the Climate Mobilization. I have a background in mental health and I was a licensed professional counselor for many years. So I'm really excited to be here for this conversation with Margaret about the intersection between psychology and the climate crisis. Since our founding, the Climate Mobilization has been working to create World War II scale emergency mobilization to reverse climate change. We develop and pioneer the strongest and most aggressive policies and strategies for reversing climate breakdown. And we have developed and launched the Climate Emergency Framework, which you hopefully have been hearing about as cities pop up all over the world with declarations of climate emergency. That kind of framing tells the truth about the crisis and calls for an all hands on deck, all society response to climate change. Margaret Klein-Salomon is founder and executive director of the Climate Mobilization. Margaret has a PhD in clinical psychology, but left that line of work to apply what she learned about psychology to solving the climate crisis. And after feeling like a voice from the fringes at times for many years, the events of last year, like first the IPCC report came out, then Extinction Rebellion came along, AOC was elected, the ascendance of Sunrise, all of that came together, and now TCM and these allies in the climate emergency movement have coalesced into this very influential force, which is helping to shape the national conversation around climate solutions. So today we're going to hear about Margaret's recent contribution, her book, Transform Yourself with Climate Truth, which is a self-help book for the climate emergency. And I'll start by asking Margaret my questions about the book, and then for the last 20 minutes of the call, we'll take your questions. So in order to ask a question, you'll see the GoToWebinar control panel that I hope popped up when you joined the call. That rectangle on your screen has a little area at the bottom for questions, and you can type in your question there, and then I will choose your question and unmute you. I'll let you know that I'm going to do that, and then you'll be able to speak and we'll be able to hear you. Unfortunately, we can't all see each other, but we can hear your question when I unmute you. So we'll start out generally. Margaret, would you mind just giving us some background and telling us about the book?
Yes, thank you so much, Marina. Thanks everyone for coming. This is a special mobilizer call. On these thought leadership calls, I'm usually interviewing a guest, and so I'm very pleased to be the subject. And yeah, and I'm very pleased to tell you all about my book, which I'm really excited about. So the book is called Facing the Climate Emergency, How to Transform Yourself with Climate Truth. It is a self-help book for the climate emergency. But unlike most self-help books, the goal is not to make you feel better. The goal is to make you or the reader feel the pain of the ecological crisis, the fear and terror and grief and anger and guilt and shame and whatever other negative, painful feelings about the ecological crisis, to feel them more acutely, to bring them into sharper focus, because I believe they're everywhere. They're like everyone is having a psychological reaction to the climate emergency, whether they know it or not, or whether they kind of partially know it and partially try to keep it out of mind. But so the book is about actually welcoming those feelings, tuning into them more, and in order to use them, to use your pain, turn your pain into action, and not just any action. Most people, when they hear, oh, climate action, they think, oh, I'm going to be asked to shrink my carbon footprint. And what I am asking people to do in the book and trying to guide them towards is much, much, much bigger than that. It's to become the hero that humanity needs, to join the movement, the climate emergency movement that Marina was talking about, and to go all in. So it's so I think it's a new genre, self-help for the climate emergency, with the goal, again, not being like personal satisfaction or anything in that realm, but because part of what the book is about, and part of, I think, what this time of crisis is about rethinking, like, who am I and what matters, right? The most basic questions about identity and values and how we spend our time and resources. And so the book is really tries to get people to reevaluate their lives in the context of the climate emergency. For example, I ask people to try the thought experiment of, what if the things that came before this in your life, and especially like the hard things, the worst times, the challenges, the pain, what if those, and the good things too, but what if everything that preceded this in your life was leading up to this moment? What if this is actually like the point, is addressing the climate emergency? What if that's why you're here now, at this very moment? So yeah, it challenges people to consider their life in a different way, to grieve the future that you thought you had. Which was the subject of I did an excerpt of the book. I published it on Common Dreams last week, and it was really great. It got shared almost 3,000 times. So it really, I think, resonated with people. But so it's about grieving the life that you thought you had, the future that you thought you had. Everybody has hopes and dreams and goals for the future, especially young people are particularly focused on that. And for me, I thought that I had a wonderful life ahead of me as a clinical psychologist, and I thought I would write books for popular audiences, and have a family, and sounds great, right? But as the climate crisis, as I became more aware of what was happening with the climate crisis and what was our trajectory for the coming decades, I realized, my life, my bright future, it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to pan out, because we're just too interconnected for that. We're too dependent on the climate. So maybe I could have, I don't know how long, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years of that life, while more and more countries are having state failure, and there's more famine, more superstorms, more massive migration. Maybe I could try and have my little, happy bubble or whatever, but it just wouldn't work. I'm too connected, and it would only be so long until the climate crisis comes for everybody. So by grieving the future that you thought you had, realizing that it's just not, it's impossible. So many of my friends, I'm a millennial, I'm 33. Many of my friends are like saving for retirement. Some view that as like a really important thing to accomplish, but it's not. it's not realistic. It's based on a fantasy that many of us share. I mean, our society as a whole still shares that there's this future that has something to do with, like, that's some kind of continuity from where we are now. But we at the climate mobilization know that, yeah, continuity with the past is absolutely impossible. We have two choices: transform or collapse. And so my point is, grieve the future that you thought you had, because it's going to collapse, and then put all your energy into the transform possibility. That once you do that grieving, that it kind of frees up your energy and capacity to really make the climate emergency movement succeed and grow. Because as Marina said, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful that the climate mobilization isn't alone anymore in advocating an emergency transformation. But the movement is still, relative to its aims, small and marginal, and it needs to grow as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's the general overview of the book. It is, like I said, it's a self-help book. It also combines elements of memoir. I draw pretty heavily from my own experience, because I hope that it can help people kind of walk that path from normal mode into emergency mode. And so some recent news I'm really excited about is I signed a book contract with New Society Publishers, um, which is obviously a ideological fit for the book. They're really excited about it. So the book will be coming out as a both an ebook and a paper book in the spring, in March, most likely. But that's kind of far away. It's actually pretty fast as far as book publishing goes, but it's kind of far away. So one thing that I want to let everybody know is that if you want to get the book before then, you can do that through the Kickstarter. I'm going to be sharing with I'm going to be sharing a PDF of the manuscript with people with Kickstarter supporters. I cleared that with the publisher before signing the contract, because I was like, oh, I can't whatever go back on, or like delay so much the delivery date for the people who have already supported the Kickstarter. And they said, no problem, send them a PDF. So yeah, not only does supporting the Kickstarter help me, help the book, help us expand the reach as much as possible, you will get the book months in advance. Oh, and finally, I should say, all proceeds from the book are going to Climate Mobilization Project, the 501c3 affiliate of the Climate Mobilization. So it's not, yeah, it's your support. Yeah. This is not my get rich quick scheme. It's supporting the Kickstarter is supporting the organization.
Margaret, you're talking about how this is a self-help book and this is like a new genre because it's not trying to help people in the traditional sense, but something that really hooked me about your book, I got to read it ahead of time, was the idea that like for so many people there's a sense of meaninglessness in their work, and there's this kind of malaise, and that this heroic calling that you mentioned is actually trying to pull people out of that. And I think that it actually is helping people, because it's like not only this calling to save the planet, to help ourselves quite literally, but also that the process of doing that could wake people up into like a new vitality. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, right. So I agree with that. And why I emphasize that the goal isn't to make you feel happy or to make you feel less pain is because, well, I think part of what we need to do as individuals and as a society is make a shift in focus from, consumer culture and American capitalism is so me, right? I want to get mine. I want to get rich. I want to get more. I want to compete with other people, and I want to have my hedonistic, pleasures and narcissistic gratification. And what the climate emergency needs, what humanity needs in this time of climate emergency, is a really different orientation, which is, like mission over self. People who are dedicated to the project, above all, of restoring a safe climate, as opposed to, for example, getting credit, which is attention, which is something I talk about in the book. This is like a struggle for me, because I'm very competitive by nature. And so, watching, for example, Sunrise have so much success, I think like, oh, like whatever, that should be the climate mobilization, or what about me, or but I have to remind myself that that's not helpful, and that what matters a great deal more than my competitive instincts is the mission and actually changing politics and protecting humanity and all life. So, yes, my emphasis on the goal of the book being, like a rise to heroism rather than personal satisfaction is trying to emphasize that shift. But what Marina said is also absolutely right. I do believe that this is a lifestyle that actually promotes immense satisfaction. And speaking personally, it is the happiest, or I'm happy, I don't know, that's an interesting word, but most fulfilled, most confident, most meaningful that I have ever felt. And I have no inclination to stop or do something else, because it's actually, quite a wonderful way to live, to care about something so much more than yourself. It's like a relief.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. So I was thinking about the term climate truth. We use that a lot in our work, and your book talks about transform yourself with climate truth. Can you just kind of define that for folks and say why we need to face it, why it's important?
Yeah, so the idea of climate truth is facing reality, the reality of the climate and ecological crises. And very importantly, not merely having an intellectual understanding of those things, but actually integrating that understanding into our emotional lives, into our identity, into our thoughts and plans for the future. And yeah, really taking it in and reckoning with it, on a personal level, right? The climate crisis is something that is happening to me and to you. And it's not something that's, far away in the future, far away geographically. Um, it's happening, and it's happening very fast. And so to live in climate truth is to not just to understand, again, the facts of the crisis, but to get informed and let it change you, to allow yourself to be touched by, and not just the facts, but the implications of them for the world and for you and your future, your family. That it's it's not easy, and that's why I wrote a self-help book, to try to help people.
Right. I was going to say, like, what if people say, no, thank you. That doesn't sound appealing at all. I remember one of my first times trying to reach out to friends to get people together to talk about this, like 10 years ago or something, a friend said, I just can't deal with that. I've got too much else going on. It's too painful. Sorry, but I'm not coming to your thing. And yeah, so what do you say to people who say, like, this is too overwhelming, I can't?
um yeah, generally speaking, my approach is to work with people who are ready. So the audience for the book is people who are in pain and looking for answers.
Hmm.
And, you know, because people who don't, who like your friend, are like, no, can't handle it, don't want to do it, they're not going to read this book. They don't want this book. They don't want that. And I do think that can change and is changing pretty quickly. But yeah, I just, there's so much to do. The climate movement has so much to do. So much growth, so many projects, so many sectors. So I mean, there's so much. So to me, um, it's always seemed like the best use of limited time and resources to, I mean, people would say negatively, to preach to the choir, but I think we think of it more as like building the choir, helping the choir practice and get on the right songs and in the right key, and right, because like it's not like the environmental movement choir has been like totally crushing it for the
Hmm.
past decades. Like there's work to do among the people who care. There's still, we can, and then so yeah, so I think about it as kind of like extending out concentric circles. So the first people to work with are the people who 5 years ago, who were like, yeah, climate mobilization, this is a great idea, like this is what we need, let's make it happen. Okay, awesome. Then expanding out to like the broader climate movement, or the part of the climate movement that was like, interesting ideas. Yeah, we're like, we're interested. And now that there has been this breakthrough and an actual climate emergency movement exists, I think we are in the process of extending out to like the progressive movement, the broader progressive movement that is now really taking on climate and the Green New Deal as a core part of their program. And then from there, I think it extends out to like more like mainstream Democrats, as well as different sectors, faith sector, public health, and medical sector. That's already there. There's some movement there. Um, Business is somewhat far out on there, but also needs to have outreach. So yeah. So I don't personally sweat too much with this book or otherwise about like trying to reach people who aren't interested, but rather really trying to reach people who are.
Hmm. And so, what's your advice then for people who are interested, who want to face this but are finding it painful and challenging,
Yeah, great. Um,
isolating, scary, all that other stuff?
yeah, so this is this is really, kind of at the heart of the book. Is about like how to relate to those painful feelings and how to relate to feelings generally. And the approach that psychoanalysis, which is my kind of school of psychology, teaches that I believe very, very strongly in is that there's no such thing as a thought crime or an emotional crime, that all thoughts and feelings are acceptable, even the totally perverse or like whatever, evil, cruel, violent, whatever, anything. It's just a thought or a feeling. It doesn't actually hurt anyone. So the best way that we can relate to all the craziness that's going on in our mind, because humans are very complicated and have very uh, complex and kind of chaotic internal lives, is to accept it all, welcome it all, be curious rather than judgmental. Like, oh my God, how could I feel that way? I'm so whatever, such a terrible family member, or whatever. People judge themselves so harshly for what they think and feel, and it's like, wow, you actually don't have to. So yeah, so that's number one, is welcome all thoughts and feelings. And as part of that, there's some kind of psychoeducation, some reframing that I think can be really helpful, such as the fact that actually experiencing your feelings makes you stronger emotionally. People sometimes think that like to cry over the ecological crisis or something else makes you weak, but it is actually the opposite. That the more comfortable, they say in psychology, we talk about affect tolerance. The more you can tolerate all the different things that are going on inside you, yeah, the irrational ones, the ones that you would feel embarrassed about if other people knew, or whatever, all of it. It makes you stronger. And specifically about the climate emergency, I really try to emphasize how those feelings can be fuel for effective action, and that they come from a really good and important part of ourselves, right? That grief, for example, the grief that you feel is because of the love that you feel for humanity and the living world, that it's a good thing. While it is painful, I mean, wouldn't you rather feel moved by the sixth mass extinction of species and the coming collapse of civilization? Wouldn't you rather be moved by that and affected by that than numb and apathetic? I would, and I think it's better. I think it's healthier. Um, yeah.
Thank you. I'm thinking about the contrast between like the business as usual, the people that we see walking down the street who seemingly are unbothered by what's happening, and then for those of us who have kind of had some sort of awakening and have reckoned with some of these feelings, you're talking about how that can just seem like a trance. And I'm wondering if in your work and in writing this book and talking to people as you have over the years, if you have examples of times when like you've seen people wake up and what kind of shape that's taken for them.
Yeah. So one interesting thing about doing the climate mobilization is that people get really excited about it, because sometimes people find the climate mobilization and they say things like, oh my God, I didn't know that there was an organization out here that was actually calling for a solution like this. I didn't know, like, I'm so excited. And so it's not exactly waking up to the problem. Those people generally have understood the problem for quite some time, but it's waking up to the fact that all is not lost, necessarily. Like, there's still time. There is a set of policy um, there, and yeah, government action and public-private partnerships and societal action that could very well protect us from the collapse of civilization and restore a safe climate and stop the mass extinction of species. And it's not even rocket science. It's uh, a set of seemingly common sense policies, such as banning all new fossil fuel infrastructure and shutting down the fossil fuel infrastructure we have now on a schedule. Transitioning to regenerative agriculture on a short timeline. So, so seeing people uh, get really excited, and sometimes to the point of like, and I went through this too, but sometimes to the point of like, is this person who's like writing to us, they seem like kind of over the top, but maybe that's just because they're like in this really excited state right now. Maybe we should, like let them cool off for a couple of days. And so yeah, that's one thing. And in terms of waking up to the climate emergency, yeah, I've seen that too, more and more. And it's interesting to see people in my kind of immediate circle, friends and family, who, hear about this all the time from me. And yeah, there's movement. There's really, I mean, I think it's happening. Whether it's happening fast enough, I guess it's not. I mean, we always need to push faster and harder, but it's happening.
Um, that's making me think about emergency mode, which is another one of the sort of terms that you throw around in the book and that we talk a lot about at the office. Do you want to talk about emergency mode a little bit and just how you see using that to bring our society to where we need to get?
Yes. Um, so emergency mode is the concept that how individuals and social movements and a society act during an emergency is fundamentally different than how they act in a non-emergency, and which makes it so important to be clear in our language and in our policy advocacy and in our tactics that climate change is an emergency and the sixth mass extinction of species is an emergency. And so how is it different? How do you act differently in an emergency versus normal? So let's say your house is on fire. Everything stops, right? The fight that you were having with your spouse, the project that you were working on, the nap that you were taking, the movie that you're super into, but right, none of that matters because you need to achieve safety for yourself and the other people in the house. That's it, right? So it's an intense level of focus, very high degree of available resources, cognitive resources, and any other resources, financial, physical, whatever, they go towards solving the emergency. The priorities are clear. Like safety first. So in the case of a house on fire, it's pretty short, right? This is over in an hour or less. But in a long emergency, like World War II, for example, or, there's other ones as well, like, life-threatening illness that can go on for months. In a emergency like that, there's still a very high level of focus, very high commitment of resources, extremely high priority, but there's some level of balancing other priorities and aims but it's like under the umbrella of the climate emergency, or excuse me, of the emergency. So during World War II, there was a national consensus that we needed to win the war, and that if we didn't win, that everything was at risk. Our way of life, even our lives, everything was in jeopardy. So sacrifices, so a level of commitment that people would not usually make, such as moving to a new state to work in a war job, or women going into factories for the first time. These kinds of changes you might not make during for like a normal issue, but this is an emergency. We need to do the extraordinary, dig deeper, reach higher. Um, so yeah, that's the basic breakdown of emergency mode.
Thanks. And I'm thinking about this book in terms of like strategy for bringing more people into emergency mode. And you mentioned like starting with the people who are already concerned and helping them process their feelings and like I think plug in a really effective way into work for the movement. And I think that's like that makes so much sense and that's really important. But I'm also wondering if there could be a way to use this to like bring new people in, or thinking about your groups, for example, and wondering if you can talk a little bit about using this book to grow people's awareness and bring new people in.
Totally. Yeah. So I don't, okay. One audience for the book is the climate movement and the climate emergency movement. So, people who are already engaged, but still, I mean, it's not exactly like a binary, oh, I've done my work or I haven't done my work. Like, we can all use a little tune up, reminder, there can be gaps. Okay, I've done this part of the work, but but I really haven't opened up to my anger or to whatever. So yeah, so the movement itself is an audience. But when I say people who are in pain or people who are alarmed and looking for answers, those by and large are not people in the movement. I mean, like, what is it? The majority of Americans at this point are either alarmed or concerned. And it's almost like 20% of Americans who are alarmed. I'm referring to Yale's Six Americas polling, right? I mean, 20% of Americans. So that's like 6 million, about 6 million, or wait, no, 60 million, right? Yeah. Like a very large number of people who are like trying to grapple with this. I mean, it seems like a huge number, but then on the other hand, it's like, well, how could you not be? Where on the planet is the weather normal? I mean, things, the heat wave in Europe, the crazy hailstorm in Mexico in June. I mean, this thing is accelerating out of control, and people are worried. So I think it's a broader net than like people who get it, are in the club, understand, the difference between gradualism and mobilization, right? I'm talking about people who know very little about climate but are still alarmed because they know that much. um so yeah.
And I'm imagining people like taking this to a book club maybe and sharing it with others. And maybe it doesn't resonate for everybody, but that there are a few people for whom it wakes them up out of this trance and brings them, maybe people who are worried about climate change but don't see it as their own problem.
Totally.
I think it's a powerful invitation to say to somebody like, this is your responsibility and not someone else's.
Totally.
Um,
And as you point out, I definitely am hoping that is a way that the book will be used, both like specifically bringing it to book clubs. I think that's great. But also just sharing it generally. I mean, this stuff is hard to talk about. it's hard to cope with. It's especially hard to cope with when you feel alone. So yeah, I really hope that people read the book and share it. And in doing so, yeah, domino effect.
Yeah. I want to remind people that we're going to be taking questions in just a couple of minutes. So if you have questions, please share them in the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. And I'll be choosing questions to talk about and unmuting people so that they can speak. So add them now if you have them. And Margaret, we have this mobilizer community of folks who support the climate mobilization and who come together for these calls. And I know that some of these calls have been instrumental in your thinking. And I wondered if you could just speak for a second about how your time over the years with this group has kind of shaped the book.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you asked that because it really has. Yeah, for the year particularly of 2018, and a little bit before and now in 2019, but especially for the year of 2018, hosting mobilizer calls around life in the climate crisis and hearing from callers about what their personal experience, their subjective personal experience is of living in this time has been really foundational in terms of the book. And one of the big takeaways for me from that, from the life in the climate crisis conversations, is the degree of alienation and loneliness that people feel who are living in climate truth. That it's like, I mean, it's like the movie The Big Short, which I think it's so interesting that Adam McKay, the director of The Big Short, understands the climate emergency and is a climate mobilization supporter, because the people in that movie, if you've seen it, were before the financial crash of 2008. They understood what no one else could see, was that the housing market was going to crash. I mean, that basically it was built on a house of cards, and I mean, it was inevitably going to crash. And they were like running around trying to profit off of this, and trying to, in order to do that, they had to get some people to believe them. And they were met with everywhere, you know, oh, you're Chicken Little, you're just totally crazy. What the housing market, that's the safest investment of them all. And so for people living in climate truth, it's like that, but much worse, because the stakes are so much higher. And it can feel like, am I an alien here? Because my planet is having a climate emergency, but my friends and family seem to be not having a climate emergency. And I try to talk to them about it, and they say, whatever, don't be so negative, don't ruin the party. So yeah, the theme of alienation and the burden, the social isolation kind of burden is definitely a main theme of the book. And also around the discussions, like I've started doing some facilitated discussions around the book, and it's something I want to kind of scale up and get other people facilitating discussions, and potentially discussions without facilitators, where just primarily just to give people a chance, like we have done on the mobilizer calls, a chance to talk about what it feels like, what is your relationship to the climate emergency? What does it feel like to be living in this time? And I gotta say, when people's reaction when I talk about this is so often, oh, nobody's ever asked me how I feel about the climate crisis. No one's ever asked, because A, we don't talk about it nearly enough, but B, when we do, we talk about it in terms of facts and science and intellect and policy, and not something that, again, is happening to me. And of course I have all kinds of feelings about it. So by inviting people to get in touch with the subjective and emotional side of this experience, and critically to do that in fellowship together, um, is a big takeaway from the mobilizer calls.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to take a question from Jeff. And Jeff, if you could, I'll unmute you here in a second. If you can just tell us where you're from and ask your question. Should be able to hear you now.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, hey, my name is Jeff. I live in New York City. Want to first say thank you guys for putting this on, and thank you to Margaret for participating in the recent public hearing down at City Hall in New York. I was at that, and that's kind of how I found out a little bit more about this particular movement with climate mobilization. So thank you. My question is, how do you stay on top of all of the updates in the climate movement, looking for the most reliable sources for information regarding, what we can do, any sort of participatory action or policy updates, how we can continue to stay involved, like you said, discussion groups, things like that. Just wondering what your recommended sources of information are.
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's a tough question because I know that I feel at this point like a flood of information, events, and for me, the hardest thing is like basically filtering filtering things out so I can focus on the things that I am taking on. But yeah, so I would say, in terms of like publications, The Guardian is very good. And I don't know, some blogs like Common Dreams is pretty reliably covering the movement. But I would say the organizations themselves to get on, if you're in New York, so I would get on the Extinction Rebellion email list, the Climate Mobilization email list, the Sunrise Movement email list, and like they will tell you what's going on. And then also social media, specifically Twitter. I love Twitter. This is the only thing that I do. I don't really do Facebook anymore. And because Twitter's so great, because if you follow climate emergency people, then it's like, and climate journalists like Kate Aronoff, and Jonathan Guy of The Trouble, and David Roberts, and that the Twitter feed like is like the pulse of the movement. Greta. So honestly, a big way I stay informed is through Twitter and just following climate emergency people.
Cool, and I'll plug our newsletter. Every 4 to 6 weeks we publish a newsletter which volunteers put together, and it's a great rundown of things that are going on. But I second your Twitter recommendation. I do that as well. Thank you, Jeff. And I'm going to unmute Art. Art, you share your question and tell us where you are calling in here from. Should be able to hear you now.
Hi. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Marina. I live in upstate New York, near Ithaca. My question was this. You started speaking about climate truth. This sounded to me like a comment I heard from somewhere about the first Democratic debate. Paraphrasing it, someone said, they don't know how to debate about it yet. We all heard the aphorisms. We heard them mention words like existential. I'm wondering if anyone even knows what existential means, deeply down what it means. I mean, as you said, it's painful to live in climate truth. I wake up every day and it's wrenching. So, to your book, finding one's voice, authenticity, words to use to discuss and come to terms with the climate crisis is something we all need to do, especially politicians. Is the book an attempt to evoke that?
Yes. I mean, it's not specifically targeting politicians, but I totally agree with your analysis. And some of the other work of the climate mobilization is more specifically targeting politicians, like, because yeah, I totally agree with you. And the Democratic debates were an excellent example of the cognitive dissonance that they're dealing with right now. Like, Kamala Harris said it's a climate crisis, right? And Beto O'Rourke said this is an existential threat, and in a tweet. And Joe Biden said in a tweet it's a climate emergency, right? So that's good. I mean, it is a positive step that they're talking the talk, but obviously they have not internalized this, because it's like they kind of say it and then move on. And
Indeed.
that's the thing about existential crisis. You don't just move on. You actually really have to focus on this, because otherwise you die. So,
Well, isn't that what someone just needs to say? Look, this is life or death. And a politician needs to say,
totally. And yeah, I think so. Okay, so I think what politicians need to do is very similar to what everybody needs to do. I mean, they have a specific role, but they need to reckon with the climate emergency, right? Look squarely at it, understand everything that is at risk, process their own feelings, and be able to tell the truth. And like that's, as you're saying, everything is on the line. This is not like a nice optional thing that to do. This is something that we must do. Our choice is to transform or collapse. Which are we going to choose? And so, yeah, so I think that politicians, other than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which I have not reckoned with this, and a few other politicians, but yeah, I mean, even Jay Inslee, who is, I really appreciate him bringing the climate focus to the debates. I think that he is also holding back, possibly on purpose, or possibly because he hasn't really dove this deeply. But yeah, one thing that I do want to just mention, because I think it's relevant here, is everything that I'm saying, this whole idea of telling the truth and accepting feelings, this is not what the mainstream climate movement says. Or, I mean, for the last 30 years, the mentality in the movement has been, we have to like cajole people. We have to tell them a specific kind of narrative, a story that's going to appeal to them, and kind of almost trick them, nudge them into making small changes. And there's this idea in the climate movement that I'm sure these candidates have been exposed to, possibly a lot, that says fear doesn't work as a motivator. You can't scare people. You have to give them hope rather than fear. And it's honestly a terrible and terribly destructive idea that has, I think, caused the environmental movement and the climate movement to lose decades of time because it's wrong. Fear absolutely works as a motivator. I mean, are you kidding me? Fear is one of the most reliable motivators, not just for humans, but for all animals. Fear is literally the process through which we translate awareness of danger and risk into action. And if we didn't feel fear, we would just get eaten by predators, right? Because we'd be like, oh, there's a lion. Okay. Oh, now I'm dead because I didn't, my heart didn't race and I didn't start figuring out what I'm going to do. So, I mean, so part of one issue, I don't know how central it is to the weak performance of the Democrats in the recent debates is this idea that, and I mean, and it's not, and with politicians, it's not just fear doesn't work as a motivator. It's also people don't want to be the bearer of bad news. That politicians, these are all people who like want to be popular. They want to be, cool and have, charismatic. And to say, hey guys, we're in terrible danger and we need to stop doing a lot of stuff that we would prefer to keep doing in order to protect ourselves. It just takes a lot of courage and emotional work. And yeah, the good news is the thing that I will say about the presidential primary that I'm extremely excited about is there's still 7 months until the first voting in this primary. It's insanely long. I mean, it's a real weird situation, and I don't think it's very good for our country as a whole. But in this instance, I feel very grateful because it gives the movement time to keep hammering away. Like we might get a climate debate now. The DNC is going to vote on that. This is in August. This is a recent development. The candidates keep issuing plans. They keep releasing new plans and making new commitments. And for the first time, this was not happening 4 years ago. For the first time, there's actually a competition among the candidates about who is going to be the strongest on climate. And I think in large part because of the presidential primary, we have such an amazing chance to really transform the conversation. And I think what we need, where we're going, is we need to get a national consensus that we are all personally in danger. Me, you, my family, your family. The climate crisis is coming for you. When we get that consensus, and it shouldn't be that hard because it's true, and because the Mother Nature is making it more and more clear. She's like kind of banging at the door. Hey guys, I'm coming for you. Once we get that, if we can get that before the presidential primary and the congressional primaries, and we can elect the strongest possible candidates, that's the ideal scenario for me. I mean, anytime that we can achieve that national consensus that's like incredibly politically powerful and might be able to kind of overwhelm even recalcitrant politicians. But ideally, the best thing is to not have to do that, to have a government that's been elected by a society that understands the threat. So
thank you, Margaret. And it seems like your book is coming along at a really good time and a strategic time to capitalize on this momentum that we're feeling. And I thank all of you for your questions. I'm sorry to those of you who we didn't get to. There were quite a few specific questions around certain issues or getting a job in the climate movement and that kind of stuff. And I would say getting in touch with climate emergency organizations like the Climate Mobilization, like Sunrise Movement, school strikers, those different groups, finding somebody that's meeting in your area. I had one question about regenerative agriculture, so looking for other folks that are doing that work and reaching out on Twitter or by email or whatever way that you can to try to find others who you can speak with who are doing similar work. Margaret, I wanted to share with people your Kickstarter, just because if they're interested in providing some support through the Kickstarter is going to not only help with the book, but also the groups and outreach that you're talking about. So hopefully we can put this book and its information in the hands of as many people as possible, and its kind of transformational power can be spread around as widely as possible. If you want to say more about that, I'll get the Kickstarter up on the screen so people can see what it looks like.
Yeah, thank you. That would be terrific. And we should also get them the link. I've tried to put it in the chat box, but I think it only went to organizers. So if you could send that to everybody. Oh, but now we're seeing your screen. Yeah, so this is the Kickstarter, and we'll share a link. I don't know whether everybody's familiar with Kickstarter, but it's a like crowdfunding platform. So as you can see here, the book has currently raised $9,000, which is pretty good and can help go towards, as Marina said, publicity and spreading the word, and also those facilitated discussions that I am talking about. But $9,000 is great, but how Kickstarter works is you either meet your goal or you don't. And my goal is 20, and I have 10 days to go. So yeah, support is much appreciated. Supporting the project, as I said, you will get access to the ebook months in advance, or it'll be a PDF, but you will have the content of this book, and I think it's really good. I think it can help its readers, and also, so supporting the book and also sharing it is yeah, that's a great 1-2 combo, because also just because then you can say to your friends or your network or your email listserv or whoever you're sharing this with, you can say, I supported this, I think it's worthwhile, and you should too. And that is, or you're invited to as well, that is a more compelling pitch, much more compelling than, oh, you should do this thing, but I am doing this, will you join me in doing it? So yeah, that would be really wonderful. This video here, there's a video of me talking about the book and talking about calling people to heroism, which is so much what the book is about. And Marina, if you scroll down slightly, the Kickstarter starts, I show this excerpt. So this is also, for people who haven't read this yet, this is the only current published excerpt of the book. So it is the best place to get a taste for the style and content of the book. And it's also obviously great for sharing, because, what one could understand some skepticism from people like, oh, really, a self-help book about climate change? That, what are you talking about? Like, what is that? And so I think this excerpt demonstrates that this is a topic. There's a lot of material here. There's a lot to explore. There's it's something that we really need to do. So yeah. Oh, and then there's these different levels of support here on the side that come with different kind of rewards. And the kind of more expensive ones offer like personal coaching from me, or like bring me to a group, or I'll bring you into a group discussion. And yeah, so if that is a consideration, if that is a possibility for you, please consider those more, those like higher tier support.
All right, well, we are over time by a few minutes, so just out of respect of everyone's time, we can wind up here. But thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for your questions and for hearing us out. I hope that this will be powerful for all of you as it has been for me. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I always appreciate when people come to these mobilizer calls, but this one is special. So thank you all. I see those numbers going up on the Kickstarter right now. So thanks to those of you who are jumping in and taking action now. And yeah, let's just more broadly speaking, thank you to all of you for living in climate truth. For it is a great burden of responsibility to understand what's going on. And so I thank you for being there with me and with each other. And I really believe that it's not over. There's still a relatively small window through which we can achieve radical and transformative change. And thank you for being a part of that.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.